Hello friends, welcome to Apply IT. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate behavior of Promise.all method in JavaScript. There are many static methods available in Promise class, and Promise.all is one of the methods related to concurrency. So in this video, we are going to understand it practically. If you are new and not aware, this is the 8th video on the series on JavaScript promises, where we try to understand advanced JavaScript concepts practically. If you haven't watched our previous videos, do watch those videos, then come back to this video for better understanding. You can find links for those videos in the video description. So let's jump into today's topic, understanding behavior of Promise.all method practically. So first we are going to write one function called getAPI1. This is simulating a successful API call. So this function is returning one promise. This getAPI1 function is returning a resolved promise after 3 seconds. This function returns response as API1 response as a promise. Now before we understand the behavior of Promise.all, we need to understand how to measure time that is spent in some activity. So we are going to call this getAPI1 function into another function, and we are going to measure how much time is spent by this particular function. So let's write another function called timePromise, in which we call getAPI1 function. Now because getAPI1 function is returning a promise, we want to execute in a synchronous manner. We use await keyword in front of that. Now let's understand how to measure time that is spent in any activity. So we have two functions called console.time and console.timeEnd, using which we can measure time that is spent in some activity. So we need to call console.time before the activity and console.timeEnd after the activity. And both the functions take some unique timer name as input. For this activity, I'm providing getAPI1 time as the name of the timer to both the calls. So let's understand this practically. So let's go to Google Chrome and open developers console. So first we write getAPI1 function, which gets resolved after 3 seconds with API1 response as the result of this API call. Now we write another function, timePromise, which is going to measure time that is taken by getAPI1. So we write this function. Now we are going to call this timePromise function. So let's call it. We call it, and we'll observe that it is taking approximately 3 seconds for completing this activity. Now let's add another API function called getAPI2. We are writing this function to simulate a successful API call. This getAPI2 is returning a resolved promise after 4 seconds. In the same way, we write another function called getAPI3, which returns a resolved promise after 5 seconds with API3 response as the result of that promise. This is also simulating a successful API call. Now let's use Promise.all method, which is static method of Promise class. So we use Promise.all and we provide here 3 promise objects. So you can see here we have called Promise.all and we are measuring the behavior of this Promise.all in terms of how much time is taken by this particular call. We use console.time before this call to Promise.all and we use console.timeEnd after call to this Promise.all. We have done this so that we can measure the time that is spent by Promise.all. So let's understand this Promise.all function. Promise.all is a static method. It takes an iterable, for example, an array of promises as input, and the method returns a single promise. So here in the code you can see that we are passing a response of getAPI1 and getAPI2 and getAPI3 as an input into this iterable. Now because each API function is returning a promise, we can put call to that function here, and that function is going to return a promise, and that promise will be input to this Promise.all in the iterable. Now let's understand the possible return values of this Promise.all. This Promise.all method returns a single promise. So there are two situations. If all the promises get fulfilled, then the method will return a fulfilled promise with an array of fulfillment values as promise result. Whereas if any one input promise gets rejected, the method will return a rejected promise with the first rejection reason. Now if you can recall that get API 1 is taking 3 seconds, get API 2 is taking 4 seconds, and get API 3 is taking 5 seconds in returning a resolved promise. So we'll observe practically that how much time will be taken by this Promise.all. So let's understand it practically. We have already written get API 1 function. So we write get API 2 function. Then we write get API 3 function. Now we use Promise.all and we write our get all data function. Now let's call that function get all data. So here you observe the behavior of this get all data, how much time this function is taking in execution and what result we are getting. So I'm hitting enter key. So promise is pending. Initially promise is pending and after some time promise got resolved and we are getting response of first API call, then response of the second API call, then response of the third API call, and overall it is taking around 5 seconds. So you observe that this different API call are taking different amount of time. So when we use this Promise.all, it is going to run this API calls concurrently. So it is not taking 3 plus 4 plus 5, that is 12 seconds. It is taking 5 seconds. Now we are going to understand behavior of Promise.all in case where one of the promises is returning a rejected promise. So let's choose the second API function, which is get API 2, which returns a rejected promise. So we change response as API 2 failed. Now this function will returns a rejected promise after 4 seconds. So it is simulation of unsuccessful API call. Now because this Promise.all method will return a rejected promise, we need to use try and catch block to handle that function call. So let's wrap this call to Promise.all in try block and display error message related to that rejected promise in the catch block. And here we are going to observe how much time it is going to take. Let's understand behavior of Promise.all in a situation where one of the promises is returning a rejected promise. So let's go to Google Chrome. So in our previous case, it was taking approximately 5 seconds for execution of this. Now we add function get API 2, which returns a rejected promise after 4 seconds. And we are reusing get API 1 and get API 3. So we are not changing those functions. We have changed only get API 2, which was returning a resolved promise in previous case. Now it is returning a rejected promise. Let's also modify get all data, which now uses try and catch block. Now I'm going to call get all data. We'll observe the behavior of Promise.all. We'll observe how much time that activity is taking. If you remember, in previous case, it was taking around 5 seconds. So let's understand behavior in this situation. Promise is pending and after some time promise gets settled. So we can observe that it is taking approximately 4 seconds. We can also observe the response as error is equal to API 2 failed, which we are getting from this console log. Now because this Promise.all is returning a single promise, we are not able to get result of other two successful API call, that is get API 1 and get API 3. Now let's understand how to handle this error condition using then and catch methods. So again, we modify our get all data function. Instead of using try catch block, we are going to use then and catch methods that are available on promise object. So we write here Promise.all, which returns a single promise, and on that promise object we call then and catch method. Callback provided to then will be called in the successful situation, and the callback that is provided to this catch method will be called in the failure situation. So again we do the same thing. We iterate on this response, which is iterable, and we display response of each API call, and if there is any error, we display error condition. And again here also we are going to observe the time that is taken by this activity. So let's understand it practically. Now this third case is going to be very different. The first case was taking around 5 seconds for the execution. The second case took around 4 seconds. Now let's understand how much time will be taken by the third case. So we modify our getAllData function and we measure time that is spent in this activity. And here you can see that we provide a unique timer value, that is getAllData2, to both console.time and console.timeEnd functions. Now I'm going to call getAllData function. So here carefully observe the behavior of Promise.all and also observe how much time will be spent by this activity. So we can see that here behavior is totally different. Here it is taking 0.125 millisecond, which is very different as compared to previous two cases. And we get here response that API 2 failed because our second API function call is failing. Here we are using then and catch callbacks. So here behavior will be asynchronous, which means that the first this statement will be executed, then this Promise.all will be executed, but that will execute in asynchronous manner. And immediately after that, this console.timeEnd function will be executed. So due to asynchronous behavior, when we use this then and catch callbacks, the time that is spent in the activity fraction of second. We understood use of then and catch versus await keyword in our previous videos. So let's summarize. So Promise.all method can run all API calls concurrently. So we can use it for all or nothing behavior. As an example, consider a situation. We want to arrange a meeting of multiple members, and we should arrange a meeting only if all members are available, and we should not arrange a meeting if any one member is not available. So in this kind of situation, we can use Promise.all, which provides all or nothing behavior. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button. Do let me know in the comment section how this video was useful to you. Thanks for watching and happy learning, and we will see you in the next video.